grandfather died for that flag. Get the out of here.
Police on motorcycles arrive quickly to defuse the situation.
That way, let's go.
With the lone counter-protester leaving. These are the kinds of moments authorities are worried about.
Make no mistake about it, we're taking this event extremely serious. We know that there is a potential of things taking a turn for the worst, but that's not the Miami way.
At the courthouse where the hearing will take place, the police presence is visible. Officials say they can handle a crowd of up to 50,000.
We encourage people to be peaceful in them demonstrating how they feel.
How Trump feels is no secret. He's furious as he lurches toward yet another historic and infamous first.
I think this is going to be a really incredible moment in history.
This former federal prosecutor says while the indictment is scathing, the outcome of this case is anything but certain. Selecting a jury will be complicated, given Trump's polarizing nature and his wide base of support in Florida.
All you need is one juror to say, well, you know what, I'm troubled by this, and then you'll get a mistrial.
And Katie, some are also raising concerns about the judge in this case.
Yeah, her name is Eileen Cannon, and there are two significant concerns that have been raised by people about whether it's appropriate she's overseeing this case. One, she was appointed by Donald Trump back in 2020, and two, recently she delivered a ruling in Trump's favor that actually paused the investigation into classified documents. That ruling was later overturned by a much higher court in a scathing decision, and it's leading to questions about whether it's appropriate that she is the person to oversee this situation.
All right, Katie Simpson in Florida tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
A Canadian Supreme Court justice has suddenly retired, putting an end to the investigation into his conduct. Russell Brown had been on leave for months following an incident at a U.S. hotel. Ashley Burke begins with video from that night.
Justice Russell Brown's troubles began one night in January in Arizona.
Then we got into a fight, and he said, "You know who the I am." We looked him up after. I guess he's a Supreme Court of Canada, Supreme Court Justice of Canada.
Police body cam footage shows a guest at the hotel alleging Brown was drunk and harassing his two female drinking companions. One woman described an unwanted kiss on the neck and alleged Brown touched her leg.
I felt like he was coming on to me even though he was touching her.
Okay. Yeah. And then, I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable.
Super creepy.
What did it?
Then they alleged that Brown tried to follow them back to their hotel room without an invitation.
And he tried getting around me to the girls, and I punched him a couple times. He was ripping onto my shirt trying to get to the girls.
His legal team said the ex-Marine was intoxicated and belligerent, punched Justice Brown without provocation, and later weaponized Canada's judicial discipline process, and point to the police tape.
But I think your hostile attitude and aggressive demeanor has no part in this conversation.
The council overseeing Canadian judges was set to announce if there would be an inquiry or not. Brown's retirement puts an end to it.
I acknowledge his service. I wish him the best for the future. I have no comment on any of the process.
In a statement, Brown said he was confident the complaint would have been dismissed, but that process could have stretched into next year. He said, "I have therefore decided that the common good is best served by my retirement so that the replacement judge can join the court in time for its busy fall term." At age 57, Brown is 2 years from automatic qualification for a full Supreme Court pension. He could have served for another 18 years. The mandatory age of retirement is 75. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
This year's wildlife season is now considered the worst to hit Canada in the 21st century. That designation is a result of several factors. Right now, about 32,000 people are under evacuation order. They've been forced out by more than 200 wildfires that are currently out of control. And then there is the sheer volume of land that's been burned. That stands at 4.7 million hectares. Alberta has already seen more land destroyed than its previous worst year on record. One of the major hotspots just outside the town of Edson, forcing thousands from their homes. Well, tonight, Julia Wong has been given access to the evacuation zone just 2 kilometers away from the flames and the front line of the fight.
Crews are working furiously to protect the town of Edson from a ferocious wildfire burning nearby. Well, this has been absolutely horrible. We have had we've had these fires going on now for into 7 weeks.
Inside the evacuation zone, a look at the damage residents have not had access to yet. This rubble is what's left after fire destroyed a storage shed in a popular local park. It also decimated the overflow campground.
The damage we see here today is devastating, but it could have been so much worse, and this is what we're afraid of.
Firefighters say this has been a wind-driven fire. The wind carried embers from over there across the McLeod River, moving the fire north towards Edson. Firefighters are facing tough conditions. Hot temperatures and low humidity are creating challenges for ground crews.
Extreme fire behavior, and that's when you get smoldering ground fires, surface fires come into the crown and create these crown fires.
About 70 members of the armed forces arrived Monday morning as reinforcements. The military was here a few weeks ago. They are back to help with this latest flare-up.
So the crews, they're working hard. They're tired. They're not frustrated yet. They're trying to get at this, and they want to get it out and get it done. So yeah, they're busy.
It's work evacuee Luke Burke can't help but think of as he worries about what could happen next. He's one of more than 11,000 people under the mandatory evacuation order.
The unknown, right? Don't know if everything burns. I don't know if we go back to Edson.
But there's little he can do other than sit with his family and wait.
Try and keep your mind off it, playing, and just pretend that we're just camping. Helps the kids. My daughter was pretty worried, but I think she's doing better now.
For now, the fire is not advancing closer to the town. There's hope it will stay that way.
It's going to be up to Mother Nature for a lot of this. With it being 1.5 kilometers away from town, it is critical that we get this situation under control before we bring people back.
And Julia joins us from just outside Edson. So Julia, the evacuation order has been extended. Is there a new timeline?
So Adrienne, no, there is not a new timeline, and it's something officials don't even want to touch because they don't want to disappoint people. It was clear during the media tour that they do not want people to come back until it's absolutely safe for them to do so. Now, we do know that there is a storm coming through here tomorrow night, and it may bring some rain, which is good news, but it could also bring some gusty winds, and winds can bring unpredictable fire activity.
All right, Julia Wong just outside Edson. Thank you. One person has died after a tour boat exploring an underground cave capsized in western New York today.
Somehow at the end of the cave or the destination, that 300 feet section there, the boat became unbalanced and capsized. All 28 or 29 people were thrown into the water.
Now, some people were able to get to safety themselves. Others had to be rescued. 11 people were injured in the incident, which happened at the Lockport Cave just east of Niagara Falls. Officials say the man who died was trapped under the boat, which was similar to this one, which you can see on the company's website. A year-long CBC podcast investigation has uncovered allegations of past serial abuse, linking one Ottawa man to 15 alleged victims across Canada. The former music teacher taught for decades. As Julie Ayrton shows us, his accusers say school boards, police, and the courts simply failed them.
The investigation started with just one woman, Anne Marie Robinson, a former deputy minister in the federal government.
I wanted to better understand what happened to me and whether I was the only one.
Robinson says in 1977, on a school band trip, her former music teacher provided kids with alcohol, then raped her. She was 16.
I don't remember much else about it except being horrified the next morning.
She says the sexual abuse continued in this music room and closet. After a year, she says she quit school to get away from the teacher. It took decades for Robinson to report to police what happened. When the courts failed to deliver answers, Robinson came to CBC News.
I really wanted to know how this could happen in a bureaucratic institution that children attend, and they have to attend.
Our investigation has now found 15 girls who claim they were exploited, propositioned, or sexually assaulted by William Douglas Walker in the 1970s and 80s.
The former teacher has never been convicted of any crimes, despite multiple complaints to police forces. The Ontario College of Teachers banned him from teaching in 2001.
Walker declined requests for interviews, but we unearthed official records and 2 years' worth of interviews with dozens of witnesses. Evidence shows several adults across various institutions ignored complaints and warnings about the teacher.
He continued to move schools. There was many victims, and even evidence of kids telling the teachers and the adults around.
The teacher also spent 24 years in a military band, the Royal Regiment of Canada. Jeannie McKay was 16 when she met the teacher.
And that's where some of the sexual encounters took place.
The Department of National Defense says it has no record of complaints about Walker. McKay, a teacher in BC, now knows several others who say they were abused by the same teacher. Robinson says she's found comfort in knowing she's no longer alone.
I feel so close to them in a way that no other person in my life could be.
The former teacher doesn't deny having sex with Robinson and other teen students, but he contends the relationships were consensual. Several survivors say they will continue to seek accountability for what happened to them. Julie Ireton, CBC News, Ottawa.
For more on the investigation, you can check out CBC's newest podcast, The Banned Teacher. You can download episodes on CBC Listen or wherever you find your podcasts. A severe labor shortage has prompted parts of Alberta's tourism industry to turn to temporary foreign workers in a big way. As Paula Duhacek tells us, that is raising some concerns.
After several years of being short-staffed, businesses in Rocky Mountain tourist hotspots have been rushing to fill jobs with temporary foreign workers.
It's a pretty mind-blowing increase. Like, it's really fast and really big.
In Canmore, businesses were cleared to fill twice as many jobs with temporary foreign workers than they were before the pandemic. In Banff, that number more than tripled. So what's driving the increase?
So the easiest answer to that is that there's been favorable changes to federal immigration policy.
Food service and accommodation businesses can now hire up to 30% of their staff through the program's low-wage stream. For businesses, that means a source of both labor and stability. Temporary foreign workers have closed work permits, which means they can't easily jump from job to job.
So essentially that provides some predictability in their workforce. And in return, that foreign worker is supported by their employer to obtain permanent residency.
That's how June Kahayuran's family got a foothold in Canada.
My wife before is a temporary foreign worker. After she got her permanent residency, then we have also the status. Then after several months, we came here in Canada.
But others worry the program puts these workers in a precarious spot.
So they get tied to a specific employer, which makes them very vulnerable to mistreatment, especially if we think about the service sector industry, which already has questionable working conditions and standards.
In response to questions about worker vulnerability, a federal spokesperson says the government has strengthened protections and that those experiencing abuse can apply for an open work permit. The temporary hiring changes for the hospitality sector have been renewed once already. They're now set to expire in October. Paula Duhacek, CBC News, Calgary.
To news from Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive now, and an emerging picture of slow and sometimes costly gains. Ukrainian forces seem to be hitting multiple points along the front. In one area, video appears to show them taking village after village, house by house. That advance in Ukraine's southeast near Velika Novosilka involves victory in a string of villages after several days of heavy fighting. But the main fortified line of Russian defenses is still 20 kilometers further south, a potentially daunting challenge. Russia's apparent tactic to trip up and then wear down the enemy. Further west, this Ukrainian assault was stymied by mines and artillery, Western tanks and armored vehicles burning and hastily abandoned. A divisive figure, media mogul, real estate tycoon turned populist politician. Long before Donald Trump, there was Silvio Berlusconi. Italy's longest-serving modern leader died today after a battle with chronic leukemia. Chris Brown has more on his polarizing legacy.
For better or worse, Silvio Berlusconi was one of the most influential people in Italy since the Second World War.
He was a multi-billionaire and media tycoon, elected prime minister 3 times. Beginning as a nightclub singer, he amassed a fortune in construction and broadcasting. He also bought AC Milan, one of Italy's most storied soccer clubs. Supporters loved his self-made populist touches, but his propensity to mix business and politics landed him in and out of court for decades on corruption-related charges. Then there were the lurid allegations that Berlusconi had sex with a 17-year-old. Court trials were filled with stories of so-called bunga parties full of naked women. He was eventually acquitted, but the scandals left a huge stain. Frequent racist and offensive remarks hurt him too.
And if I sometimes see a beautiful girl, I say, better to like girls than to be gay.
Among the first to express condolences was Russia's Vladimir Putin, a pariah among world leaders, yet who Berlusconi embraced. He was a great friend of our people, said Putin. Italy's prime minister, whose coalition includes Berlusconi's political party Forza Italia, paid tribute to him.
Silvio
Berlusconi was most of all a fighter. He was a man who never feared to defend his beliefs.
He was loved and he was loathed.
This political lecturer says Berlusconi will leave a huge, unanswered void in Italian politics.
I don't see any other Forza Italian politician as wielding so much charismatic power as Berlusconi did, in the good and in the bad ways.
Berlusconi's last public words came exactly a month ago in an address from his hospital to his political supporters. Today, it was hard to escape the sense it was the end of an era. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Well, the Canadian golf world is still buzzing today in the aftermath of Nick Taylor's big Canadian Open win.
Good pace. Are you serious? Oh, my goodness!
Reaction from his home club in BC. And the mistaken tackle everyone's talking about. Next. The fight to save a vital ocean ecosystem.
This project, Mission Iconic Reefs, is the largest coral restoration project in the world.
Susan Ormison gets rare access inside the mission to regrow Florida's coral reefs. Plus, the kindness of strangers.
We will never be able to repay you for what you did.
How some good Samaritans stepped up to save a Halifax man's life. We're back in 2. Well, that horrifying sight is lava flowing down the slopes of one of the Philippines' most active volcanoes. Since Sunday, the mild eruption has caused landslides and forced evacuation of communities totaling 13,000 people. Experts do warn it could become explosive and life-threatening. Well, the Canadian Open trophy may already be on Nick Taylor's mantle, but the celebration is far from over. As John Hernandez shows us, fans and friends at his home club are still reveling in the Canadians' historic win.
I think it will go down in the annals of history.
The greens are abuzz at Abbotsford, BC's Ledgeview Golf Club as members here celebrate the success of a newly minted Canadian champion.
I don't think I remember how high I jumped or what my reaction was like, but it was quite crazy.
Good pace. Are you serious?
A 72-foot putt that won Nick Taylor the Canadian Open, the first Canadian to do it in nearly 70 years.
He got all the calculations right and a bit of lady luck on his side there, knocking it in.
The moment followed by an equally thrilling celebration with an unexpected twist when his friend and fellow tour member Adam Hadwin showered him with praise and champagne, only to get mistakenly tackled by security.
It looked like he handled it well. He got up and kind of apologized to the security guy himself, didn't spill a bottle of or a drop of that bubbly.
Brad Clapp is the general manager of Ledgeview, the club that Taylor and Hadwin joined when they were kids.
They would play against each other. They may have, simulated that putt to win the Canadian Open endless times on the Ledgeview Golf Club greens.
Practice that earned Taylor national championships in junior, then amateur, and now the PGA.
He's always been able to pull it off when there's probably the most stress.
Success Golf Canada believes will inspire the next generation of Canadian talent. It hopes to double the number of Canadians on the PGA Tour over the next decade.
Some people call this a golden moment of golf. I'd actually call it the moment of golf. It's the beginning of our journey.
A moment in Canadian sport some thought would never happen. John Hernandez, CBC News, Abbotsford.
Well, a big wheel in the game show world is calling it quits.
Phrase is a category. Just say it.
Bust a move?
Yeah, that's it.
Pat Sajak is making a move of his own. The Wheel of Fortune host says next season, the show's 41st will be his last. The 76-year-old has been at the helm for decades alongside Vanna White. No word on who might replace him or if White will leave the show with him. Well, rising ocean temperatures are putting some deep strain on one of the Earth's most unique ecosystems.
We have lost, since the 1980s, almost 97% of our coral coverage.
Susan Ormiston gets unusual access to the scientists trying to breathe new life into coral reefs. Plus, a crucial Western ally defending Ukraine against Russia, but there are worries about its own commitment to democracy.
The leader of the opposition is every day attacked for being a traitor.
Terence McKenna shows us why some fear for Poland's future. The National takes you deeper into the stories shaping our world. Next. Warming oceans pose a growing threat to coral reef ecosystems worldwide. And off the coast of Florida, you can really see it. Over the last 40 years, reefs have been decimated by disease and rising temperatures, so much so, corals there no longer reproduce naturally. So to stem that tide, innovative scientists have taken to their labs. Our international climate correspondent, Susan Ormiston, got rare access in the Florida Keys with researchers on a mission of reef restoration.
These divers are warriors in an underwater battle.
It's a really dire and bad situation.
Their weapons, hammers and brushes, and science.
We wouldn't exist without coral reefs. And if we allow it to degrade and go away, we're going to see consequences throughout the planet.
The coral reefs here have been decimated by disease, by heavy human use, and now rising ocean heat.
We have lost, since the 1980s, almost 97% of our coral coverage, which is crazy fast.
Biologists Celia Lito and Zach Craig are part of a rescue mission, preparing the reefs for rebirth with new corals. Engineered onshore at Mote Marine Laboratory.
We have kind of like an IVF clinic in here. So we have our parent colonies, and then we have a fertilization area over here, and then we have a nursery for the babies behind us.
These elkhorn coral are broodstock, fed daily and nurtured in a tank which replicates their seasonal cycle until they're ready for once-a-year spawning.
There's a lot of challenges. First of all, just the timing of when they naturally reproduce. It usually happens around the full moon in August, so it actually occurs in the middle of the night and at the peak of hurricane season.
Wow. Full moons and hurricanes.
Yeah, very romantic.
If full moons work their magic, the baby corals grow while Celia and her team explore which types of corals survive climate stress and disease better.
Something called resiliency screening that allows us to see how their genetics will essentially act out in a real-world situation. So our overarching goal is still just to create as much genetic diversity as we can, because that process, the natural reproductive process, is not occurring on coral reefs in the wild anymore.
Once they're mature enough, the babies graduate outside to one of 80 tanks. Each can hold up to 1,000 coral. Next, they're fragmented or cut into tinier pieces to grow faster until they're ready for the ocean reef. Scientists are convinced that reefs are at a tipping point. So multi-million dollars are being pumped into Mission Iconic Reefs.
So this project is really exciting.
Led by the U.S.'s National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Katie Lesneski is a marine biologist who's managing the project.
So we will be restoring about 50 American football field size of coral reefs over the next 20 years, and that will involve about 500,000 individual corals.
Timely and urgent with rising sea temperatures.
Earlier this year, we found that the global sea surface temperature average is at the highest it's ever been in recorded history, which is quite alarming.
And why are we predicting that it will go even higher?
Yes, so this year is expected to be an El Nino year, and in particular in the Caribbean, when that is the climate pattern, we see an increase in the potential for coral bleaching due to those increased temperatures.
Conditions are ripe for another problem, nuisance algae, which can smother the coral. So, to prepare the reef, scientists have to tackle that too. And here's their weapon.
Whoa.
So this is a big male.
The Caribbean king crab, easy to breed, voracious, and not picky.
There are little guys that go out and weed our coral garden on the reef. They eat a lot of algae. The crabs that we're looking at here are a very effective grazer, and by removing that algae, they reduce the competition between algae and coral.
Ecologist Dr. Jason Spadaro manages the reef restoration program.
They eat more algae than just about any other herbivore in the system, even stuff that's calcified and chemically defended, really nasty stuff that's very difficult to get rid of. These guys will go to town on it.
One female can produce 5 to 6 times a year, with each clutch numbering hundreds of eggs. Within a year, divers will start to add hundreds of thousands of juvenile crabs to the reefs to help those corals survive. The battle out here is a sign our oceans are critically out of balance. Restoration is a massive project, and it can feel daunting. Celia calls it eco-doom.
It is an enormous problem, and it is no problem that any single person or organization can take on. And it can cause you to kind of spiral a little bit, because you're like, oh my gosh, this is so big and I'm so small, like how can you possibly make a difference?
But for these young scientists, fieldwork is the antidote.
So they started out as about a square centimeter in size, and they've since grown. So we are actually going to plant these guys in clusters of 4, and each cluster is going to be a tight cluster, so they're going to be really close together so they can fuse together rapidly.
Operation Outplant is now underway on Looe Key. Those baby corals raised in tanks are about to start their own colonies down below.
All right, Celia, ready?
This project, Mission Iconic Reefs, is the largest coral restoration project in the world. And scientists are going to be monitoring this coral for years. Even with the degradation, underwater is a magical place. Zach has mapped out exactly where the clusters will go. Each with its own identifying tag. They massage a ball of epoxy to secure the coral pucks to the reef. It's piecemeal work, backed up by years of advances in marine science. Some of the earlier plantings are thriving, some are not. The damage already done will take decades to recover. Celia and Zach are wrapping up today's mission, giving coral colonies a fighting chance to reproduce again, naturally on the reef.
This is where we do our best work, and we're slowly but surely making great work in the right direction, which is really reassuring.
Successful planting?
I would say so, yeah. They look really happy. The previous outplants out there, they're growing from the last time they were out there, and then now we just added those new ones, which are a little bit smaller, but I think they'll be happy out there.
You have a happy new home.
Yes, a very nice home too. It's a beautiful reef.
A good day's work.
It's really hard to turn away from those pictures. Can you just pull back the curtain a little bit in terms of how you got that?
Well, between the dive team and our team, we had 4 GoPros on the go, so we put them on long 6-foot-long poles and plunged them down into the reef, only we couldn't see exactly what we were shooting. But another diver had one on his chest and one secured to the reef at the bottom, so we were able to capture the detail, the beauty and the engineering of this amazing outplanting on that reef.
And it's really important to see it to understand it. One thing I'm curious about is that the threat of a warming ocean isn't going away. So why is this year particularly significant?
Not at all. I mean, we have been talking about that, haven't we? El Nino is confirmed. It is developing this summer, will strengthen into the fall and the winter. It could bring both drought and flooding, warming oceans, and possibly more coral bleaching. So that's the threat. We don't know how severe it will be.
All right, Susan Ormiston, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Poland could be Ukraine's most important regional ally as it defends itself against Russia. But as it heads into an election year, there are concerns about the fate of its democracy.
It appears your government has turned public television here into a propaganda arm of the ruling party.
Up next, Terence McKenna looks at political divisions in the country and its worrying slide towards authoritarianism.
Ukraina czeka na jasny sygnał o klarownej perspektywie.
The president of Poland really gets around, and world leaders are listening. Today he was in Paris, pushing the presidents of France and Germany to get Ukraine into NATO. And Poland's friendship with Canada has grown closer as they work together to help Ukraine resist the Russian invasion. Well, tonight, Terence McKenna investigates whether that same Polish war effort is helping to close a political rift in that country, a rift that has some people very worried.
The world is watching very carefully what's happening in Poland. On the one hand, the country has mounted a spectacular effort to welcome Ukrainian war refugees.
If I have to once again describe that, I would say one of the greatest moments in the history of Poland.
But at the same time, there is an authoritarian right-wing government looking for scapegoats.
That could be the leftists, that could be the LGBT community, that could be anyone.
What is at stake for Poland in the Ukraine war?
In the back of everyone's mind that Poland could be next.
We're here to find out if this country can find its way back to democracy and the rule of law. A portrait of Poland at the crossroads. On the first weekend in June, hundreds of thousands of Poles took to the streets of Warsaw to express their opposition to the right-wing government here that is passing anti-abortion and anti-gay laws, that is fighting Europe over perceived anti-democratic judicial and political reforms. Attending were opposition figures like former President Lech Wałęsa and the present opposition leader, Donald Tusk.
Ma taką władzę. Przecież nie ma żadnego powodu, żeby najlepsi ludzie na świecie mieli najgorszą władzę na świecie.
Hovering in the background is the war in neighboring Ukraine, and with a national election coming up, the government might be discovering that it's dealing with a Poland that is very different from the country it was. In recent years, the Polish government seemed to be moving in a right-wing authoritarian direction, more anti-immigrant, anti-Europe. Then came Russia's February invasion of neighboring Ukraine, and everything changed dramatically. When millions of Ukrainian war refugees started pouring over the border in 2022, Poland mounted a massive national effort to welcome them. The refugee effort was something that all sides could support, even in an extremely polarized political atmosphere. Anna Gromada is a sociologist at the Polish Academy of Science.
Such a high number of Polish people had the refugees at their private homes. Usually, in the huge majority, these were total strangers. Like, for example, I invited people whom I met 5 minutes earlier on Facebook. But this was like extraordinary phenomenon. Like, everybody felt we want to do something.
At Poland's Foreign Affairs Ministry, Łukasz Jazina is the designated spokesman for the right-wing Law and Justice government.
I'm shocked by this myself because I am Polish and I know very well Ukrainians. And I'm a historian, what means I'm not an optimist in my life. And I wasn't sure at the end of the February, after this moral decision, moral imperative we did, that it would work. But it works.
That remarkably generous attitude towards Ukrainian refugees is in marked contrast to Poland's record during the last major European refugee crisis in 2015, when it was Syrian war refugees trying to enter. Poland's government refused to accept even the small share of refugees requested by the European Union. Former Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski speaks for the liberal opposition Civic Platform.
Well, first of all, remember that the Ukrainians are 95% women and children. So they are clearly refugees from the war. Whereas previous waves were mostly young men and mixed political refugees and economic migrants. And remember also that we were the same country with Ukraine for 400 years. So there is a natural affinity and a natural hospitality, greater hospitality towards Ukrainians.
Another issue the left and right-wing Polish parties agree on is the massive national effort to support neighboring Ukraine in its war with Russia. While the United States has provided most of the weapons for the fight, almost all of that has transited through Poland, most through the well-fortified U.S. military base in Reznau.
Every bullet from the United States, every plane, every arm, every Mauser, everything was sent to Ukraine was sent through the Polish territory, which makes us the biggest enemy of Russia.
Polish-American journalist Adam Reichart now works in Krakow.
In the back of everyone's mind that Poland could be next. And that's why everyone is supporting, we need to help Ukraine defend itself, because if Ukraine does not defend itself, Poland definitely could be next.
You might think all this means that political polarization in Poland has disappeared, but that is not the case. A few years ago, the right-wing Law and Justice Party, still led by former Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczynski, decided to take over the national public television network TVP. The network's reputation was similar to BBC or CBC. Now it has become a ferocious promoter of the right-wing politics of the government.
Więc to nie jest tak, jak mówi teraz Donald Tusk, że teraz ta Rosja jest inna, wtedy...
The daily targets are the leaders of the liberal Civic Platform opposition, including former Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
Na tym polega polityka zagraniczna.
And the former Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, shown here as almost Hitler-like.
Oh, I'm portrayed as a German and a Russian at the same time. And the leader of the opposition is every day attacked for being a traitor, for being a German, if you can believe it.
Government spokesman Łukasz Jazina doesn't deny what's happening on Polish TV.
It appears your government has turned public television here into a propaganda arm of the ruling party.
You know, two other big important informational channels are completely against the government.
We see public television constantly portraying opposition leader Donald Tusk, for example, as pro-German or even pro-Russian.
Let's say Polish information TV and channels are victims of the severe political fights which is destroying our society since 20 years.
In the national election approaching next fall, surveys are giving the right-wing Law and Justice Party and the left-wing Civic Platform about an equal chance of forming the next government. Right now, Poland is being fined millions of euros per day by the EU because of the government's perceived assault on the independent judiciary and other anti-democratic moves.
I personally think that another win for the ruling party, which has these authoritarian ambitions, would be a huge challenge for the possibility of Poland returning to rule of law.
Even as they fight over political issues, both sides seem to agree that Poland's character is being changed by the massive influx of Ukrainian refugees. It is becoming more multinational, more open.
I think that in a few years we will wake up in a Poland which doesn't really reflect the same Poland it did 10 years ago. But these changes are happening quite rapidly and also on a level where people are not fully aware.
I think there was a lot of fears among the Poles about immigrants. We were once very multicultural societies, all crashed during the Second World War. But I think, and I'm now sure, more than sure, I was sure in February 2022, that now Polish society doesn't feel fear about immigrants anymore, even those from the Middle East.
Just a few days after U.S. President Joe Biden announced that Ukraine would be allowed to have American F-16 fighter jets, training of Ukrainian pilots began in Poland, with Poland now playing the greatest role in training and delivering equipment to Ukrainian forces. The world has a great stake in the future of this country and its commitment to democracy.
So Terence McKenna just showed us Poland's aggressive support for Ukraine. Well, former NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen just revealed to the Guardian newspaper that Poland is even considering leading a coalition of Eastern European countries to fight directly against Russian forces in Ukraine. That would be an explosive development.
We will never be able to repay you for what you did. You're a true earth angel.
Now, coming up, a Halifax man is resuscitated by strangers in our moment.
One out of every 3 Canadians is a smoker, and most of them do the majority of their smoking at work. For years, smokers have known that their habit dramatically increases their risk of lung cancer, emphysema, and heart disease. But now there is evidence that their smoking also harms the health of their fellow workers who don't smoke. Studies in Japan, Europe, the USA, and Canada have concluded that the risk of lung cancer and bronchial disease is more than doubled for non-smokers who are forced to breathe secondhand smoke. The smoke that drifts through the office and that's invisibly recirculated but not filtered by the workplace ventilation system.
There can be no doubt anymore among reasonable people that it hurts non-smokers.
The dangers of secondhand smoke have been well documented in a soon-to-be-published book by ex-smoker Martin Dewey.
I had quit smoking at great cost to myself, and I was very proud of having done it. And it really annoyed me that, having gone to all that work, I would still have to go and be exposed all through my working hours every day in order simply to make a living. I felt trapped.
As smokers have dwindled into the minority, non-smokers have pressed for semi-solutions like segregated offices, smoking cessation programs for their smoker friends, and better ventilation systems. But some Canadian workplaces have taken a new direction. Here in Kingston, Ontario, the heart of old Upper Canada, the outside air is as crisp and clean as the facade of this pre-Confederation City Hall.
And just as pristine and traditional as the city itself is Kingston's newspaper, the Kingston Week Standard. It's Canada's oldest daily newspaper, established in 1810. But on January 1st, 1985, this traditional newspaper did something very radical.
Journalists are notoriously heavy smokers, yet here in the Whig newsroom, not a cigarette in sight. The paper's publisher banned smoking altogether. At the same time, the paper also began to refuse all tobacco advertising. Publisher Michael Davies was unfazed by charges from the tobacco companies and some of his smoking employees that he'd usurped a natural right.
I think the right is the right to clean air, and the right to fresh air by everyone, and the right to pollute somebody else's air is the unnatural thing.
Momentum to ban workplace smoking is picking up. For instance, on New Year's, the Boeing Corporation in Winnipeg told its 600 employees to butt out. The company has also instituted a preferential hiring policy towards non-smokers. And now the federal government is following the lead of private corporations like Boeing and the WIG standard. The government's latest announcement does not go so far as to totally ban smoking in federal office buildings, but it does guarantee a mediation process so that members of the Public Service Alliance who don't smoke will be protected from the smoke of others. Undoubtedly, non-smokers in the private sector will be paying close attention. In Toronto, I'm Michael Foreman for CBC News.
I'm Saroja Coelho. Tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner. As wildfire smoke blankets more Canadian cities, the House of Commons has been sidelining climate for the economy. What will it take to move the debate forward? Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, it was a Tuesday, just a Tuesday. Frank Whiteley was on his way to work at Canadian Tire in Halifax when he had a major heart attack, leaving him with no pulse. But thanks to the quick thinking of some Good Samaritans and a little bit of CPR training, Frank has a second lease on life. A life saved is our moment.
When I got there, Frank was unresponsive, no pulse, no breathing. So we laid him down and started compression because he had no pulse. I'm trained with CPR and I had to do it in the past on my father, but got there too late. So he passed away in 2016. I always felt bad not being able to bring him back, but doing this to Frank and see that I didn't fail made a huge difference.
He's a big kid at heart. He's very loving, very genuine. We're lucky to have him.
I love my grandkids. Love my wife, especially my great grandkids as well.
Thank you on behalf of my family and myself from the bottom of our hearts. We will never be able to repay you for what you did. You're a true earth angel.
I just want to thank him. Yeah, just thank him.
Melissa Savoy, you did an amazing thing. Frank is due to be discharged tomorrow. As they all said, please learn CPR. For those of us here at the show, someone we care about very much was saved by people who stepped in when she was having a heart attack. We will be forever grateful to them. You too can be that person who makes a difference. That is the National for June the 12th. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.